The wind whips across the cliffs of Saipan, cold despite the tropical sun. It tastes of salt and fear. A young soldier, his tunic soaked with sweat, clutches a small worn card in his trembling hand. The ink is faded, but the words are seared into his mind. Do not live in shame as a prisoner. Die, and leave no stain on your name. It's from the Field Service Code, his constant companion. He hears the rasp of a bayonet scabbard against rock nearby, a sound that has become as familiar as his own heartbeat. In the quiet of his memory, another voice whispers, a line from an old book his instructor once quoted. The way of the samurai is found in death. But this isn't the age of samurai. His hands are not those of a legendary swordsman. They are the hands of a farmer's son, now gripping a rifle. The heart beating against his ribs is his own, terrified and tragically young. How did it come to this? How did a nation transform an ancient complex warrior ethos, the way of the samurai, into a doctrine of mass sacrifice for a 20th century conscript army? This wasn't a simple hand-me-down from history. It was a deliberate, powerful act of reinvention. The story begins long before, in a Japan emerging from centuries of feudal rule. The original Bushido was never a single unified code. It was a collection of house rules and philosophies, like the famous Hagakure*, which spoke of a readiness to die, but was written in a time of peace full of paradox and poetry. It was a guide for a privileged warrior class, the samurai, whose status was officially abolished during the Meiji Restoration in 1868. As Japan raced to modernize, it faced a crucial question. With the samurai gone, how do you forge a national army, loyal not to a local lord, but to a divine emperor? The answer was to take the idea of Bushido, strip it down, and rebuild it for the masses. Thinkers like Nito Ganazu in his influential book Bushido, The Soul of Japan presented a romanticized version to the West, emphasizing virtues like rectitude, courage, and benevolence. But the version being forged at home was taking on a much harder edge. The state became the new master, and loyalty to the emperor became the ultimate duty. This new Bushido was drilled into the soul of the nation. It started in the classroom with the 1890 Imperial Rescript on Education, which demanded students offer themselves courageously to the state. It echoed in the barracks, governed by the 1882 Imperial Rescript to soldiers and sailors, which declared that duty was heavier than a mountain, while death was lighter than a feather. Every morning, millions of soldiers and citizens would bow towards the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, a daily ritual reinforcing their connection to a divine authority. State Shintoism elevated the emperor from a ruler to a living god, and service to him became a sacred obligation. The lofty ideals of honor and compassion were still spoken of, but they were increasingly overshadowed by an uncompromising demand for absolute obedience and a glorification of self-sacrifice. Death before dishonor wasn't just a saying. It was becoming the fundamental principle of the Imperial Japanese Army. As we move into the 1930s, the atmosphere darkens. A new generation of cadets marches under the piercing gaze of instructors who preach that spirit is superior to steel. On their bunks lie new field manuals, their pages filled not with tactics for survival, but with philosophies of dying. An idea is taking hold, a dangerous belief that the spiritual strength of the Japanese soldier, forged in the crucible of this modern Bushido, can overcome any material disadvantage, any number of enemy machines. The drumbeat of war is growing louder, echoing from the plains of Manchuria and the cities of China. And the sword of the samurai, once a symbol of personal honor, is being reforged into a weapon of total war, its glinting edge reflecting a terrible impending dawn. The year is 1930. The air in the barracks of the Toyama Military Academy is thick with the scent of sweat, polish, and something colder. Discipline. This isn't just training. It's a forging. They call it Seishin Kyoiku, spiritual strengthening. It's a ritual of slaps and wooden swords meant to hammer away weakness, to build a spirit as hard as steel. Every morning, the gravel grounds echo with the roar of 100 men thrusting bayonets at straw dummies. It's a dance of death, perfectly synchronized. One breath, one step, one thrust. An instructor's voice cuts through the air, low and resonant. Duty is heavier than a mountain. Death is lighter than a feather. This isn't a suggestion. It's an axiom, a law of physics for the soul. In a quiet corner, a young recruit writes in his diary, his words a tentative whisper against the shouting. We know from archives at the National Diet Library that he wrote, "Today, Sergeant Tanaka struck me for a poorly polished rifle. He said my spirit was also clouded, I must try harder. For the Emperor, I must become stronger. He isn't just learning to fight. He's learning to sublimate his very self into a collective will. The individual I begins to dissolve, replaced by the Imperial we. The ancient samurai ideals, once the province of a warrior elite, are now being mass-produced for a modern conscript army. By 1937, this forged spirit is tested in the vastness of China. The landscape is a blur of muddy roads and endless sorghum fields. The grand clash of armies gives way to the grinding, soul-numbing work of anti-partisan sweeps. It's a war of shadows and suspicion. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere. The people in the villages become statistics, their faces blurring into a single hostile entity. Official communiques label them *HIZOKU *bandits. It's easier that way. To fight an idea, a pestilence, is simpler than fighting a man. The code that forbade surrender and exalted aggression begins to curdle in this environment. Restraint, once a mark of the true warrior, becomes a liability. The pressure to prove one's mettle, to show unflinching resolve, creates a terrible momentum. And then there's Nanjing, a city that becomes a symbol, an inflection point where the brutal logic of the code reaches a horrifying conclusion. In 1941, the lessons of the past decade are distilled into a single, pocket-sized booklet issued to every soldier by War Minister Hideki TJ. It is the Senjinkun the Field Service Code. Its message is absolute. Absolute obedience to superiors. Absolute refusal to surrender. Absolute contempt for the shame of captivity. Do not be taken prisoner alive, it commands. Do not suffer the disgrace of capture. It's a paradox in print. An army of conscripted farmers, fishermen, and clerks is being handed a doctrine of chivalric sacrifice, while the ever-watchful eyes of the Kamikaze, the military police, ensure compliance through fear. The choice to die gloriously isn't always a choice. This philosophy is a fusion of old and new. The 18th century samurai text, *Hagakure*, provides the chilling core. The way of the warrior is found in death. This ancient fatalism is then fused with the modern ideology of emperor worship, as laid out in the 1937 government text, *Kakutai no Hangi*. It states, "The offering of one's life for the sake of the emperor is not a self-sacrifice, but the casting aside of one's small self to live in the great, august, and eternal life of His Majesty. To die for the emperor is not to die at all. It is to achieve immortality by merging with the divine. It is the ultimate purpose." Now, as the year turns, that purpose has a new direction. From the shores of Japan, a vast convoy of transport ships steams south, their decks packed with men clutching their rifles and their copies of the Senjinkun*. The gray steel of the ships cuts through the endless blue of the Pacific. On the horizon lies a new world, a new enemy. The same code that was honed in the barracks, the same spirit that was unleashed upon China, is now set on a collision course. It is about to meet the formidable industrial might of America, an empire of machines. The heat of Guadalcanal was more than just the sun. It was the friction between two worlds colliding. On one side, American Marines, their diaries filled with shock and confusion. They were fighting an enemy who simply would not surrender, an enemy who seemed to court death. How do you fight a ghost? One private wrote, "They come out of the jungle screaming, straight into our machine guns. It makes no sense." On the other side, Japanese soldiers, their letters home filled with a fierce, almost spiritual conviction. "Do not worry," a lieutenant wrote to his father from the beaches of Tarawa. "Our spirit, the Yamato Damashi, will defeat their material wealth. We are pure in our purpose." But even as he wrote those words, his unit's rice was rotting, their ammunition dwindling. The clash wasn't just men against men. It was a philosophy of spirit against a juggernaut of industrial firepower. This led to tactics that baffled the Allies. The Banzai Charge, a seemingly suicidal wave of men, wasn't born of madness. It was a tragic logical conclusion for a force that saw surrender as the ultimate dishonor. It was better to die in a final glorious assault than to be captured. This was the concept of *Gyukzai*, the shattered jewel, an honorable collective annihilation. A beautiful, terrible term for a brutal reality. It wasn't about winning the battle anymore. It was about preserving honor in defeat, dying as a perfect, shattered gem rather than a dull, intact stone of surrender. But to paint every Japanese commander with the same brush is to miss the nuances of this conflict. Not everyone read the code of Bushido in the same way. On the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi saw the futility of these mass charges. He was a pragmatist who had traveled America, who understood the enemy's strength. He forbade the wasteful banzai attacks. Instead, he designed a brilliant, deeply dug-in defense in depth, a labyrinth of tunnels and bunkers meant to bleed the Americans for every inch of black sand. His strategy was to make the cost of victories so astronomically high that America might reconsider the war. While orchestrating this meat grinder, he wrote tender, heartbreaking letters to his wife. He wasn't a fanatic. He was a dutiful soldier, a husband, a father, mourning the inevitable cost of a war he knew was likely lost, but one he was honor-bound to fight. As the American advance pushed closer to Japan, the desperation grew. In the Philippines in late 1944, a new, even more terrifying interpretation of the warrior code was born. With Japan's veteran pilots gone and its naval power decimated, Vice Admiral Takejiro Nishi made a desperate calculation. What if the pilot and his plane became a single, guided weapon? What if the ultimate expression of spirit was to physically merge with the attack? This was the birth of the Kamikaze, the divine wind. Young men, some barely out of their teens, were asked to make this ultimate sacrifice. They were given a white *hachimaki headband, sometimes marked with the word *hisho, certain victory. Mothers and sisters sewed *senenbari*, 1,000-stitch belts, each stitch a prayer from a different woman, meant to protect the wearer. But protection from what? A bullet? Or from the fear of their one-way mission? The young pilots wrote final letters and poems, *tanka*, that are agonizing to read today. They swing between genuine patriotic fervor, a profound love for their families, and a subtle coerced performance saying what was expected of them. As one survivor later recalled, "We were all convinced we had to do it. But at night, in the dark, many of us cried." It was the ultimate tension between individual agency and overwhelming state coercion, between an honorable duty and a fanatic's end. This code of death before dishonor, once the domain of the samurai and then the soldier on a distant island, was no longer confined to the battlefield. As the American war machine steamed relentlessly towards the home islands, the government began preparing its people for the final defense. The code was coming home. Now, every man, every woman, every child was being told they must be ready to become a shattered jewel. The air in Okinawa's caves is thick with fear, heavy with the scent of damp earth and unwashed bodies. Civilians huddle in the darkness, clutching flimsy paper leaflets dropped from the sky. The paper promises safety, food, water. But a more powerful narrative has taken root here, one whispered in shadows and reinforced by the Kempeitai, the secret police. It's a story of unspeakable atrocities awaiting anyone who surrenders. Teachers, their voices strained, instruct their young pupils on how to use grenades not against the enemy, but against themselves. To die, they are told, is an act of purity. To be captured is the ultimate stain. This is the grim harvest of propaganda of the Senjinkun military code that has made surrender a taboo worse than death. The pressure to conform, to choose death, is immense. Yet even in this suffocating atmosphere, whispers of dissent flicker. A handful of medics quietly defy orders, treating wounded civilians instead of leaving them behind. An officer, seeing the futility, risks his own life to guide a group of villagers towards what he hopes is a safer path, away from the cliffs. These are small, desperate acts of humanity in a storm of institutionalized self-destruction. Hundreds of miles away, deep within the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima, a radio crackles one last time. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's final defiant messages fade into static. His voice swallowed by the earth he swore to defend. His end becomes another chapter in the mythology of glorious death. Back in Okinawa, inside the command bunker at Mabuni Hill, General Mitsuru Oshijima performs his own final act. He kneels facing the sea and prepares for seppuku. His aide stands ready with a sword. It's a ritualized, almost serene end. For the men still fighting, it is the ultimate example. Leadership modeling death as the only honorable conclusion to war. In Tokyo, the mainland prepares for the apocalypse. The plan is called Ketsugo, the decisive operation. It's a strategy of national suicide. In schoolyards and parks, ordinary citizens, shopkeepers, students, housewives drill with sharpened bamboo spears. They are told they will face tanks and machine guns with these primitive weapons, that their spirit alone can repel the invaders. The city is a tinderbox of fervent nationalism and quiet dread, waiting for the spark. Then two suns rise in the span of 3 days. First over Hiroshima, then Nagasaki. The cabinet meetings become a pressure cooker of indecision. Prime Minister Suzuki wants peace. War Minister Kureka Anami, a man torn between his duty to the emperor and his loyalty to the army, resists. The old guard cannot fathom surrender. For them, it is a concept that simply does not compute. Then, news arrives that shatters their last hope. The Soviet Union has declared war, its armies pouring into Manchuria. The strategic nightmare is complete. The nation is trapped. Inside the sprawling grounds of the Imperial Palace, the night of August 14th is alive with plotting. The emperor has made his decision. He has recorded a message for his people, an announcement of surrender. But a faction of young, fanatical officers will not allow it. They believe the emperor has been misled by traitors. Their goal is simple: find the recording, destroy it, and continue the war until the last Japanese citizen is dead. They call it the Koryu incident. The palace becomes a hunting ground. Officers with drawn swords prowl the darkened corridors of the Imperial Household Ministry, their boots echoing on the polished floors. They cut phone lines, hold staff at gunpoint, and ransack offices, desperately searching for the phonograph discs. Outside the palace walls, Tokyo sleeps. Its millions of inhabitants have no idea that their fate, a final cataclysmic battle or the dawn of an uncertain peace, is being decided in these shadowed hallways. The city is unaware that it might be incinerated by morning. As the coup unfolds, a few loyal officials play a desperate shell game. The two precious phonograph discs containing the emperor's voice are hidden. Not in a safe, not in a vault, but disguised in unassuming laundry baskets and containers for official documents. They are moved from room to room, through secret passages, always just one step ahead of the rebels. Each tick of the clock brings the 15th of August closer the scheduled time for the broadcast. The fate of an empire resting on 2 pieces of shellac moves silently through the darkness as the long night finally begins to bleed into the light of a new day. At noon on August 15, 1945, a sound never before heard by the public crackled from loudspeakers across Japan. The voice of the emperor. His Majesty's unfamiliar, high-pitched tones delivered an unthinkable command: surrender. He asked his subjects to endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable. For a nation taught that surrender was the ultimate dishonor, this moment was a psychic earthquake. To obey the living God, they had to break the very code he embodied. The foundation of their world fractured in an instant. The reactions were a portrait of a nation in shock. In neat formations, soldiers who had sworn to die for the emperor openly wept, their faces streaked with dirt and disbelief. Some officers, unable to reconcile this new reality, chose the path of seppuku, a final fatal act of loyalty to the old code. War Minister Korechika Anami, a key figure in the final days, left a note before taking his own life, speaking of a duty heavier than a mountain, a duty he felt he had failed. Yet for millions of others, the reaction was quieter, a silent stacking of rifles, a weary acceptance that the fight was finally over. The war ended not with a final glorious charge, but with a somber, nationwide sigh of exhaustion. Then came the reckoning. The demobilization lines snaked for miles as starving, gaunt soldiers began the long journey home to cities turned to ash. The Allied occupation, led by General MacArthur, moved swiftly to dismantle the ideology that fueled the war. State Shinto, the state-sponsored religion that deified the emperor, was banned. The Senjinkun field manual, with its commands to never be taken alive, was scrapped. It became a forbidden text, a relic of a fanatical past. At the Tokyo war crimes trials, prosecutors drew a direct line from this state-sponsored Bushido to the horrific atrocities committed across Asia, arguing that the code wasn't just a guide for honor, but a license for brutality. For decades, the world believed this was an ancient, unbroken samurai tradition. But historians like John Dower, Yoshida Yutaka, and Oleg Benish began to peel back the layers of propaganda. They revealed a startling truth. The Bushido of World War II was not some timeless code handed down from the age of samurai. It was a modern invention, a carefully constructed ideology from the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The state had cherry-picked, edited, and amplified certain concepts of loyalty and self-sacrifice, transforming them from a warrior's personal ethic into a tool of mass mobilization and totalitarian control. They weaponized a myth. In post-war Japan, the concept of Bushido didn't disappear. It transformed. The death cult was exorcised. Martial arts like Kendo and Aikido were reframed, no longer as training for death, but as paths to self-discipline and spiritual development. An artisan might speak of Bushido in terms of dedication to their craft and unwavering commitment to quality and honor in their work. Even the iconic salaryman, the corporate warrior of Japan's economic miracle, would borrow the word as a metaphor for company loyalty and tireless effort. The spirit of perseverance was kept, but its lethal edge was blunted. The story of Japan's wartime code serves as a powerful, haunting lesson. The ideals that drove an army to both extraordinary bravery and unspeakable cruelty were not inevitable, nor were they ancient. They were manufactured, enforced, and amplified by the state until they bent millions of lives toward ruin. It leaves us with a profound and timeless question. How does any society, any nation, protect its most cherished ideals, honor, loyalty, duty, from being twisted into instruments of destruction? How do we ensure that our codes of virtue lead us to build, not to break? Thank you for joining us on this journey through a complex and often misunderstood chapter of history. For more untold stories from the Second World War, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you next time.